By 30 months old, she was already on a stage. At 13, they gave her her first pill. At 16, a 60-year-old man was putting his hand where it didn't belong. At 47, she died alone in a bathroom in London. 4 lines. A whole life. A whole hell. Her name was Judy Garland. And what Hollywood did to her was a crime no one ever paid for. This is the investigation the big studios buried for decades. And today you're going to learn 4 things that change everything. First, the audio recording from her last nights in London, the one that was never broadcast. Second, the unpublished memoirs where Judy names, one by one, the men who abused her. Third, a photo from Carnegie Hall that shows something 3,000 people saw, and not one of them wanted to acknowledge. And fourth, the document that connects her death to the birth of the LGBT movement. I'll tell you when we reach each one. If you leave before the end, you'll miss the part Hollywood has tried the hardest to erase. Because when you finish this, you will never watch The Wizard of Oz the same way again. Behind Dorothy's smile, there was a little girl being destroyed in real time. Let's start at the beginning, but not the pretty beginning. The real one. Her real name was Frances Ethel Gumm. She was born on June 10th, 1922, in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And from the very first moment she took a breath, her mother, Ethel, was looking at her with a calculator in her eyes. She didn't see a daughter, she saw a lottery ticket. Ethel had been a vaudeville performer. She'd tasted applause once, and she never forgot it. So when she had 3 daughters, she didn't see 3 girls to raise. She saw 3 opportunities, and Frances, the youngest, had something the others didn't. A voice that, at 6 years old, sounded like a broken 30-year-old woman. Can you imagine that? 6 years old and already carrying the weight of your mother's ruined dreams? The first time little Fran stepped onto a stage, she was 30 months old. She could barely walk. She couldn't speak in full sentences. But Ethel pushed her right in front of a microphone, almost taller than she was, and made her sing Jingle Bells. The audience applauded, and that applause signed her death warrant. It would take 45 years to carry it out, but it was already written. And there was something else behind that family act stage. A secret that forced the Gumm family to run from Minnesota in June of 1926. Frank Gumm, Frances's father, had an attraction that back then could destroy lives. He liked young men, the ushers at his movie theater. The rumors became unbearable. One night they packed everything and fled to California. Frances was 4 years old. She didn't understand what was happening. She only knew her father was crying while he drove, and that something was terribly wrong. Hold on to that detail about her father. Hold on to it tight. Because when I tell you about the men Judy chose as husbands, you'll understand something. Trauma always finds a way to repeat itself. Frances was 4 when she lost her home. She didn't know she'd also just lost any chance of being a normal child. In Lancaster, California, Ethel multiplied the pressure. The Gumm sisters performed anywhere that would pay. Frances was always the star, but for Ethel, it was never enough. Never perfect enough, never thin enough, never enough of anything. Years later, Judy would say 5 words that explained everything. My mother was the real wicked witch. She didn't say it smiling. She said it crying eyes red like someone who finally gets to say out loud what she swallowed for decades. Why did she say it? Because when Frances was 6 and her stomach hurt before an important performance, when she begged her mother to let her stay home, Ethel looked at her coldly, slapped her hard enough to leave her cheek burning red, and shoved her toward the stage while saying 4 words that would haunt her until the grave. The show must go on. Frances walked out with tears streaming down her face. She sang. The audience applauded. No one noticed she was crying. Remember that phrase, the show must go on. You're going to hear it 5 more times in this story, and each time it's going to hurt more. But what comes next is where the real hell begins, when Frances stops being a child, exploited by her mother, and becomes property of something much bigger and much crueler. In 1935, Frances was 13 when Louis B. Mayer, the most powerful man in Hollywood, went to see her sing. She performed 2 songs. When the last note faded, there were 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Mayer stood up alone, before anyone else, and started clapping. Days later, Frances Gumm was signing a contract with MGM, 7 years of her life at 13 years old with no lawyer of her own. Ethel signed for her. That day, Frances officially became Hollywood's property. The first thing MGM did was kill her symbolically. Frances Gum stopped existing. They would call her Judy Garland, a name invented for an invented product. The second thing they did was stare at her and decide she was defective. Too fat, too ugly, nose too big, teeth too crooked. Louis B. Mayer, the same man who discovered her, started calling her my little hunchback, like it was affectionate, like humiliating her was a form of love. Another executive was even more direct. He looked her up and down and said, "You look like a pig with pigtails," to her face. When she was 14, Judy would cry alone in her dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror, trying to find the flaws everyone else seemed to see so clearly. And when she walked out with red eyes, Ethel didn't hug her. She reminded her how lucky she was. She reminded her that the show must go on. There it is again, second time. And what I'm about to tell you now is where Hollywood crossed the line into criminal. What they did to Judy Garland should have put people in prison, but nobody ever paid. That's when the pills started. Judy Garland was 14 when a studio doctor gave her her first dose of amphetamines. Not because she was sick, because MGM needed her to work 16-hour days and not eat. The pills worked. Judy lost weight. She worked nonstop. The machine was optimized. But machines break. And Judy started breaking almost immediately. She'd finish a 16-hour day shaking, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode, begging her mother to help her. Do you know what Ethel did? She called the same doctor, and the doctor brought sedatives, pills to shut her down. Think about that. 14 years old, amphetamines during the day to turn her on, barbiturates at night to turn her off, like a machine. Not a child, for 33 years, until the day she died. Her diet? Chicken soup, black coffee, cigarettes. They told her smoking suppressed appetite. 14 years old, smoking a pack a day on studio orders. At 15, the hallucinations started. High-dose stimulants destroy the mind. Judy saw things that weren't there. She heard voices. MGM executives knew. They got reports from the doctors. The studio doctors knew because they were causing it. Ethel knew too. She had given permission for all of it. No one stopped anything. Why? Because Judy Garland was making millions, and in Hollywood then and now money has always mattered more than children. But the worst still hadn't begun. What they did to her during the filming of The Wizard of Oz should keep you up at night. And what I'm about to tell you next is worse, much worse. It has to do with what Louis B. Mayer did when Judy walked into his office alone, and what was found in unpublished memoirs decades after she died. But first, I need to take you to The Wizard of Oz, because that's where everything escalates, where the heat of hell reaches a temperature no human being should ever have to endure, where the last bit of childhood left inside Judy gets crushed for good. In 1939, Judy was 16 when she got the role of Dorothy, the role that would make her immortal, and the role that would also destroy her. There was a problem. Dorothy was 12 in the book. Judy was 16, and her body had developed. Dorothy couldn't have curves. The solution was brutal. They wrapped Judy's torso in bandages so tight she could barely breathe. They flattened her chest, cinched her like a package. Judy spent months filming like that. Every time she sang Over the Rainbow, she felt like she was suffocating, but she had to smile. She had to be Dorothy. The days were 16 hours long. When her energy dropped, they handed her more pills right there on set in front of everyone, like it was coffee. And there's something about that shoot almost nobody knows, something Judy's ex-husband would reveal decades later. The actors playing the Munchkins weren't children. They were adults with dwarfism, men in their 40s and 50s. And some of them looked at Judy, a 16-year-old girl, and treated her like a toy they could use. Sidney Luft described how these men made Judy's life miserable, how they cornered her, touched her, laughed when she tried to get away. Judy told her mother. She begged her to protect her. Ethel's response? Don't cause problems. The production cost millions. The show must go on. Third time. The Wizard of Oz was a massive success. Judy won a Juvenile Academy Award. Over the Rainbow became a worldwide anthem. The public loved Dorothy's smile. The public didn't know that behind it was a drugged, abused, trapped teenager. And then Louis B. Mayer started calling Judy into his office alone for the next 4 years. Now we reach the second revelation I promised you at the beginning. Judy Garland's unpublished memoirs, the ones the studios tried to hide for decades. Judy started writing them in the 1960s. She died before she could publish them. The pages sat in a box, untouched for years, until biographer Gerald Clark found them. He opened that box, and what he discovered changed everything. Louis B. Mayer had a routine with Judy. Always the same, sinister as a clock. He'd summon her to his office. His secretary would come to the set and tell her Mr. Mayer wanted to see her. Judy would walk down the studio hallways feeling her stomach tighten with every step. She'd reach the office. She'd go in. Mayer would lock the door, the click of the lock. Judy wrote that she would hear that sound in her nightmares for decades, that even as an adult, long after leaving MGM, the sound of a door locking could make her shake uncontrollably. Mayer would step toward her smiling paternal, like a loving uncle. He'd tell her she sang beautifully, that she sang with her heart like nobody else, that she was special, that he saw things in her nobody else could see, that he understood her better than anyone. "Let me feel your heart," he would say, and he'd put his hand on her chest, on her left breast, and squeeze as he kept talking about her talent, promising big roles, while she stood there frozen, not knowing what to do. What do you do when the most powerful man in Hollywood is touching you? When your entire career depends on him? When your mother has trained you your whole life that the show must go on no matter what? You freeze. You can't move. You can't scream. You can't do anything except wait for it to end. This happened multiple times. Not once by accident, not twice out of confusion. Multiple times over 4 years, from when Judy was 16 until she turned 20. Judy told Ethel. She told her crying after one of the first times. She begged her to do something, to talk to someone, to get her out. Ethel did nothing. The contract was too valuable. The career was too important. The money was too good. The show must go on. In those unpublished memoirs, Judy wrote something that shatters your soul when you read it, something that shows how normalized the abuse had become, how trapped she felt, how warped her reality was. She wrote, "I often thought I was lucky I didn't sing with another part of my body, because then he would have found another excuse to touch me there." Did you hear that? A teenage girl thinking she's lucky the abuse isn't worse. Thanking God it's only her breasts and not something else. Feeling like she should be grateful. That's how normalized the horror was. That's how alone she was. At 20, after 4 years of this, after hundreds of times walking into that office knowing exactly what was coming, Judy finally gathered the smallest piece of courage. The next time Mayer locked the door, the next time he smiled and stepped closer, the next time he reached for her chest, Judy took a step back. Her voice was shaking, but as firm as she could make it, she said, "Mr. Mayer, never do that again. I won't tolerate it anymore." How did the most powerful man in Hollywood respond? He was offended, genuinely offended, like she had insulted him, like he was the victim. "How can you say that to me when I love you?" he asked, indignation in his voice, as if love justified abuse, as if she was wrong for setting a boundary, as if he deserved her body because he had made her famous. In her memoirs, Judy didn't hold back about Mayer. She wrote in her own hand, he was the devil personified. But Mayer wasn't the only demon in the MGM halls. He wasn't the only man who looked at that talented, vulnerable teenager and saw something available. Judy wrote about another executive in her memoirs. She didn't reveal his name, probably out of fear of lawsuits, even from the grave. But she described what happened with enough detail to freeze your blood. This executive called her into his office one day. But unlike Mayer, he didn't pretend it was about her career. He didn't hide behind paternal praise. He was direct. He demanded sexual favors while looking her in the eyes like he had every right in the world. Like she was an object he could use whenever he wanted. When Judy refused, when she said no, he lost control. He started screaming, threatening her. He told her he had the power to destroy her career with one phone call. that she'd never work in Hollywood again if she didn't cooperate, that he would personally make sure no studio ever hired her, that he would erase her. "I'll finish you if it's the last thing I do in this industry," he said. Judy was 18. She left that office shaking so hard she could barely walk. Her hands were sweating. Her heart was pounding in her throat. She knew that man had the power to do exactly what he promised. And she knew, because experience teaches you this kind of certainty, that nobody was going to protect her. Gerald Clark, after reading the memoirs and interviewing dozens of people who knew Judy, wrote in his biography, "Few women escaped the demands of men in power at MGM in those years. Between 16 and 20, Judy received multiple inappropriate propositions from different studio executives. He said he was sure every one of them tried at some point. Every one of them tried. Every man with power in that studio looked at a gifted, vulnerable teenage girl and saw something for personal use. This was Hollywood's so-called golden age. The most beloved movies in history, the ones we still watch at Christmas, the ones we call immortal classics, were made by men who systematically abused girls. That was the real price of fame, and Judy paid it in full, with interest." By 1941, not even 19 yet, Judy was already in regular psychiatric treatment, panic attacks that left her gasping for air for hours, chronic insomnia that even the highest doses of barbiturates couldn't fully defeat, depression so deep and dark that some days she couldn't get out of bed without help. The psychiatrists who treated her knew exactly what was destroying her. They knew about the amphetamines and the barbiturates. They knew about the executive's abuse. They knew about the constant exploitation. They knew this young woman was being ground up by a machine that didn't care whether she lived or died. But MGM paid them too. So they stayed quiet. They treated symptoms with more pills, never the causes. They never said anything that might upset the studio. The system protected itself. Everyone was complicit. Everyone looked away while a young woman disintegrated right in front of them. But what comes next may be the most painful part of all, because the trauma Judy suffered as a child would follow her into every decision she made as an adult, especially in love. Do you remember the detail about Judy's father? His attraction to young men, the rumors that forced the family to flee Minnesota when she was 4. Now watch what happens when trauma is never processed, when no one helps you understand why your world collapsed when you were a child, when you grow up carrying secrets that are never named. At 18, Judy got married for the first time. David Rose, a musician, a composer. He seemed kind. Compared to the monsters at the studio, he seemed different. He seemed like someone who might truly love her. The marriage lasted 3 years. It failed. But before it ended, something happened that Judy never recovered from. She got pregnant. For the first time in her life, she was going to be a mother. For the first time, she was going to have something that was completely hers. MGM forced her to have an abortion. They told her a pregnancy would ruin her image as a young, innocent girl. They told her career would be over if she had that baby. They told her they had invested too much in her to let her destroy everything. They told her she had no choice. And Judy, trapped in contracts she didn't understand, dependent on chemicals that kept her functioning, with no one defending her, obeyed. She never recovered from it. Decades later, she still spoke about the baby that was never born. She still wondered who that child might have been. At 23, she married Vincente Minnelli, a film director, talented, award-winning, respected in the industry. He seemed to understand her like no one else ever had. He seemed to see past Judy Garland, the product, and see Frances Gumm, the broken person who needed love. In 1946, Liza May Minnelli was born. For the first time in her life, Judy felt something close to complete, untainted happiness. She held that baby in her arms, looked into eyes that looked like her own, and cried for hours, not out of sadness, but out of hope, out of something like joy. She promised herself that Liza would be different, that Liza would have a mother who protected her, that Liza would never be pushed onto a stage before she was ready, that her worth would never be measured by how much money she could generate, that Liza would be loved unconditionally, not exploited. It was a sacred promise, the only pure thing she had left. But there was a problem with the marriage, a big one that connects directly back to her father's secret. Vincente Minnelli was bisexual. In the 1940s, that could instantly destroy a career. There was no room for nuance, no understanding. One rumor could erase decades of work. Minnelli needed a wife to appear heterosexual to Hollywood and the public. He needed cover, someone to legitimize him, someone to push suspicion away. Without knowing it, Judy was that cover. Think about the brutal irony of that. Judy, the daughter of a man who was forced to flee his home because of rumors about his sexuality, had unknowingly married a man who was using her in exactly the same way those rumors had destroyed her father. The trauma had found a way to repeat itself, as it always does, until someone consciously breaks the cycle. Judy began to suspect after a few years. Vincente came home late without explanation. He disappeared for hours. He became defensive and nervous when she asked where he'd been. One night, Judy came home earlier than expected. Lisa was asleep in her room. The house was silent. She climbed the stairs slowly. Each step creaked beneath her feet. Something felt wrong. She reached the bedroom door she shared with Vincente. She opened it. Vincente was in bed with another man. Judy's world collapsed again, like when she was slapped at 6 for being sick, like when she was given her first pill at 14, like the first time Mayer touched her, like every moment she believed things might finally get better and learned they could always get worse. But this was different. This wasn't just sexual betrayal. It wasn't just infidelity. It was confirmation of something Judy had felt deep inside but had never been able to put into words. No one loved her for who she was. Her mother loved her for money and fame. The studio loved her for profit. Executives loved her for access to her body. And now her husband loved her as a disguise, a shield so he could live his real life in secret. Judy Garland was useful to everyone. Francis Gum mattered to no one. That night, after Vincente tried to explain himself, after the crying, the shouting, and the terrible silence that followed, Judy went into the bathroom of her home and made a desperate decision that almost ended her life. I won't describe the details. They aren't necessary and they can cause harm. What matters is this. They found her in time. They took her to the hospital. They saved her physically. But something died that night and never came back. The part of Judy that believed she deserved happiness. The part that still hoped for a normal life. The part that believed real love was possible for her. That part died in that bathroom. Vincente Minnelli cried, begged forgiveness, promised to change, promised it would never happen again. And Judy, 26 years old, chemically dependent on substances she never chose, with a small child, no financial independence because others controlled her money, and no way out stayed. 5 more years of quiet misery, 5 years of sleeping in separate rooms, 5 years of pretending to the world that everything was fine. When they finally divorced, Minnelli would later say in an interview, "If I had loved Judy less, I could have laughed at her moods." He blamed her. He blamed her instability, her emotions, her problems. Rather than admitting he had betrayed her for years, used her as cover, and helped push her deeper into a pit she would never escape. In 1950, MGM fired Judy after 15 years of exploitation, after hundreds of millions of dollars, after taking her childhood, her adolescence, her youth, her mental health, her dignity, her ability to trust other human beings. They threw her away when she stopped being convenient. She was 28, twice divorced, one suicide attempt, addicted to chemicals she never chose, financially broken because Ethel had spent most of her money on herself, alone with a young daughter to raise. This should have been the end of the story. Another tragic child star destroyed by Hollywood. Another sad headline people read, shake their heads at, and forget the next day. But this is where Judy Garland proved she was different. Because there was one thing the pills, the abuse, and the betrayals had not fully destroyed. Her voice. That impossible voice that made strangers cry without knowing why. A voice that carried all the pain in the world and turned it into beauty. A voice that was the only thing truly hers, something no one had been able to take away, and an audience that loved her, without knowing everything she had suffered to reach them. In 1951, Judy did something no one expected. Something experts said was impossible. Something that would redefine her legend forever. She came back not to film, where studios still controlled everything, but to live theater. No safety net, no editors, no doubles. Just her and her voice. facing a world that had already declared her dead. The London Palladium, the most prestigious theater in England. 4 weeks of shows. British critics predicted disaster. They wrote she was finished, that years of chemical abuse had destroyed her voice, that it was embarrassing to watch her try to resurrect a dead career. Opening night, Judy walked on stage visibly shaking. She had taken amphetamines for energy, too many probably. Her heart was beating so fast she felt it in her temples. She genuinely believed she might die right there in front of 2,000 strangers before singing a single note. She opened her mouth. She sang the first song, then the second, then the third. 2 hours later, when the final note faded into the Palladium air, there was silence, and then the theater exploded. The standing ovation was the longest and loudest in the venue's history. The Palladium's manager, a man who had seen 5 decades of performances, said he had never heard anything like it. Judy stood on stage and cried openly in front of 2,000 people, not hiding it, letting the tears run freely as the applause went on and on and on. Later, she told the press, "Hollywood thought they were finished with me. They thought they destroyed me. But Judy Garland was reborn tonight." Months later, the Palace Theater in Manhattan. 19 consecutive weeks, 184 shows, an absolute record that has never been broken. She received a special Tony Award for an unprecedented achievement in American musical theater. Against all predictions, against all logic, against everything Hollywood had done to try to destroy her, Judy Garland was back. But the cost kept growing. How much can one person give before breaking completely? While audiences applauded her night after night, Judy was taking more chemicals than ever. Amphetamines to wake up, barbiturates to sleep, vodka to calm her nerves before every show. Everything mixed together, all at once. It was the only way she knew how to function, the only way to keep going, the only way to make the show continue. In 1952, she married Sidney Luft, her third attempt at real love, a film producer who became her manager. He promised to protect her money, her career, to be different from all the other men who had used her. With Sidney, she had 2 more children, Lorna and Joey. Judy now had 3 children she loved with desperate, ferocious intensity. They were the only pure thing in a life stained by trauma. But being a mother while chemically dependent is a special kind of hell. Judy knew, painfully clearly, that she wasn't the mother she wanted to be, the mother she had promised to be when she first held Liza. Liza, at 7, 8, 9 years old, sometimes had to take care of her mother instead of being cared for. Bringing her water when Judy couldn't get out of bed. Lying to visitors about why mommy couldn't come downstairs. Being an adult when she was still a child. All 3 children saw things no child should ever see. Their mother staggering down hallways, unable to walk straight, crying for hours without obvious reason, disappearing into her bedroom for days at a time, and Sidney, the man who promised to be different, turned out to be the same. He drank heavily, gambled away Judy's money in Las Vegas casinos, and according to Judy's later legal testimony, he hit her when things got tense. 13 years of marriage. Judy publicly described him as cruel, abusive, and destructive. The pattern continued. Another man promising protection, another man delivering more damage. And in the middle of all this chaos, Judy was about to face the cruelest moment of her career. A moment Hollywood would never forgive her for. A moment that would break her in a way unlike anything before. Judy Garland was dying while they were applauding her. She was wasting away in front of 3,000 people who loved her too much to see the truth. And everyone chose to see only the triumph, because it was easier, because it was prettier, because no one wants to watch an idol die. The album recorded that night won 5 Grammy Awards. Judy Garland became the first woman in history to win Album of the Year. Absolute peak. At 39, she had survived everything they threw at her and was still standing. But the glow of that night was burning through the very last reserve she had left, and the years that followed would be the darkest of all. In 1963, she divorced Sidney Luft. The custody battle was brutal, bloody, and public. Sidney used her illness as a weapon in court. He called her unstable, an addict, unfit to raise children. He brought in doctors to testify about her condition. He exposed her private life to judges and journalists. The judge gave him primary custody, Judy lost Lorna and Joey. The woman who had sworn she would be a better mother than Ethel lost her children because the system decided the show of motherhood could not continue for her. Fourth time, she married again. A fourth time, Mark Heron. It lasted 5 months before collapsing amid accusations of abuse from both sides. Another failure. Another attempt at love reduced to ashes. By 1968, Judy Garland was financially desperate. Every fortune she had earned over decades was gone. Spent by Ethel, gambled away by Sydney, stolen by managers, lost in divorces, nothing left but debt. She accepted a 5-week engagement at a London club called Talk of the Town, £100 a night, an amount that would have been insulting 10 years earlier. Now it was survival. There she met Mickey Deans, a man who worked at the club. They married in March of 1969. Fifth husband, fifth attempt. Judy was 46 years old. She weighed less than 85 pounds. She looked 20 years older than she was, but she still had that voice. The London shows were a public disaster. She arrived late. Sometimes she didn't arrive at all. When she did make it on stage, she was so affected by the mix of chemicals in her system, she could barely stand. She forgot lyrics to songs she had sung thousands of times. She stumbled. She lost her place. The audience, the people who had paid to see a legend, booed her. They threw food, lit cigarettes. They laughed at her while she tried to sing. Burn this contrast into your mind. Carnegie Hall, 3,000 people on their feet for 15 straight minutes. The most glorious night of her life. A London nightclub. Food flying at her face while she struggles to remember the words to The Man That Got Away. 7 years. From absolute peak to absolute bottom. From worshipped to humiliated. But here's what you need to understand about Judy Garland. Here is the proof that she was a human miracle, even completely destroyed. This is the first revelation I promised you. The audio recording of her final nights in London, the one that was never officially broadcast, exists. When you listen to it, at first you hear a woman who is confused, trembling, losing her train of thought, mixing up words, forgetting where she is. You hear the audience murmuring with impatience and contempt. Someone shouts something cruel from the back of the room. And then the music starts, and Judy begins to sing, and it's as if something supernatural takes possession of her dying body. The voice that comes out of that broken woman who can barely stand without help, who is weeks away from death, is perfect, pure, devastating, impossible. The club that was mocking her falls into absolute silence. The same people who were throwing food seconds earlier now have tears running down their faces. That recording is almost unbearable to hear if you know what comes next, because you can hear someone spending absolutely everything they have left in every single note. You can hear someone dying in real time while creating beauty that should not exist. And you know that within weeks she will be dead. And yet, even destroyed, drugged, humiliated, abandoned, Judy Garland was still better than almost anyone who has ever sung. What I'm about to tell you now is the end. And you need to be ready, because after everything you've heard, after all the pain you already know, this is the final chapter of Frances Gumm. June 22nd, 1969. A rented house in Belgravia, London, an elegant neighborhood where Judy didn't belong, but pretended she did. Mickey Deans was sleeping in another room. The marriage was already breaking apart after just 3 months. They slept separately most nights, barely spoke. At some point in the early morning, while London slept, Judy got out of bed. She walked down the dark hallway, barefoot on the cold floor. She entered the bathroom and locked the door. No one knows exactly what happened next. No one was there to see it. Hours later, when the sun was already high, Mickey woke up and searched the house. Silence. He went to the bathroom. The door was locked. He knocked. Called her name. Nothing. He forced the lock. Judy was sitting on the toilet, leaning forward. Her face was scratched where she had clawed at it unconsciously. Her body was cold. Accidental overdose. Barbiturates, the same pills a studio doctor had given her when she was 14. The same pills that had controlled her sleep for 33 years. The same pills Hollywood used to turn her on and shut her down like a machine. The same pills that finally shut her down forever. Judy Garland died at 47 years old, alone, in a bathroom, in a rented house, in a city that wasn't her home, far from her three children, without money, without the true love she had searched for her entire life. Her last public performance had been 1 month earlier in Copenhagen. The last song she ever sang in front of an audience was Over the Rainbow, a song about escaping to a better place, a song she first sang at 16 while being destroyed on the set of The Wizard of Oz, the song that defined her entire life. She finally found somewhere over the rainbow, but she had to die to get there. The show finally could not go on. Fifth and final time, Judy Garland's funeral took place on June 27, 1969 in New York City. More than 20,000 people filled the streets around the funeral home. Police had to close entire blocks. Traffic stopped for hours. It was as if all of New York had stopped to mourn. Among the public mourners, historians later noticed something unusual: an extraordinary number of men. Men alone. Men in small groups. Men crying openly without shame. Gay men, because Judy Garland, without ever intending to, without consciously trying, had become an icon for the gay community in a way no one else ever had. Why her? There are many theories. Maybe because she knew what it meant to live a life of secrets. Maybe because her suffering resonated with people who had been rejected for who they were. Maybe because her most famous song spoke of a place over the rainbow where you could be accepted, where dreams come true, where you don't have to hide. There was even a coded phrase gay men used in those years of persecution to identify each other safely. Are you a friend of Dorothy? Dorothy, the character Judy had played in The Wizard of Oz 30 years earlier. It was a way of asking, are you like me? Without risking arrest or violence. On the day of the funeral, those men cried openly in public for the first time, without hiding, without pretending they were just passing by, without fear. Because Judy, who had spent her entire life hiding pain, hiding truth, pretending to be something she wasn't in order to survive, had somehow given them permission to feel openly. Now listen carefully, because this is the fourth and final revelation I promised at the beginning. The document that connects the death of Judy Garland to the birth of the LGBT movement. That night, June 28, 1969, just hours after Judy Garland's funeral, the Stonewall Inn, an illegal gay bar in Greenwich Village, New York. Police conducted a raid, something completely routine at the time. Gay bars were illegal. Homosexuality was a crime. Police regularly arrested everyone, published their names in newspapers to destroy their lives, and left. No one ever resisted. There was no point. That was how the system worked. But that night was different. Something had changed in the air of New York. Something had changed in the people inside that bar. Maybe it was decades of accumulated pain. Maybe it was rage over the death of someone who had made them feel less alone. Maybe they simply couldn't take it anymore. When the police ordered everyone against the wall, when they started making arrests like always, something different happened. Someone said no. Then someone else said no. And then the whole bar said no for the first time. After decades of humiliation, they resisted. They fought back. They pushed police officers, threw bottles, threw bricks, set trash on fire. The police, completely unprepared for resistance they had never faced, had to barricade themselves inside the bar while an angry crowd surrounded them. What started that night lasted for days. The Stonewall riots, the exact moment the modern LGBT rights movement was born. Sylvia Rivera, a trans activist who was there that first night, said years later in an interview, "We were all very sad about Judy Garland. Her death helped push everything over the edge." That night, when people signed into the illegal bar using fake names to protect their identities, the most commonly used pseudonym was one name: Judy Garland, the woman Hollywood exploited to death, the woman abused, drugged, and betrayed for 47 years. The woman who died alone believing she had failed became, without ever knowing it, the catalyst for a revolution, a symbol of resistance, a spark that ignited a movement that changed the world. Years later, The Advocate, one of the most important LGBT publications, called her the Elvis of gay men. But Judy never knew any of this. She died thinking she was a failure, thinking Hollywood had won. She was wrong. 60 years later, we're still talking about her, not as Dorothy, but as Frances Gumm, the survivor who refused to disappear quietly. Her daughter Lisa inherited the talent. She also inherited the trauma and the addictions. But Liza had something her mother never did: real treatment, real therapy. She said recently, "My mother wasn't perfect, but she loved me with everything she had. And in the end, that's all that matters." Lorna, her second daughter, wrote, "My mother hated being called a tragic figure. Reducing her only to suffering robs her of her humanity." She's right. Judy Garland was more than her pain. She was an artist who made millions cry, a mother who loved her children with everything she had, a woman who survived horrors that would have destroyed anyone else. But she was also the victim of a system that still exists today. The question is not why Judy couldn't overcome her addictions. The question is, why was she given amphetamines at 14? Why did no one protect her? Why did her mother choose money? Why did 50-year-old executives believe they had the right to touch a teenage girl? The answer is simple and horrifying. Because they could. Because she was property. Because the show had to go on. The next time you hear Over the Rainbow, remember what you now know. Behind Dorothy's smile was a little girl named Frances, begging for help that never came. Frances Gumm deserved love. She deserved protection. She deserved a childhood. She didn't get it. But maybe the next Frances will if we remember, if we don't forget. If you want more people to know the story Hollywood buried, subscribe so Frances's voice can finally be heard. Next week, the other child stars Hollywood destroyed, the ones who survived, and the ones who didn't. Because Judy wasn't the only victim, just the most famous. See you there.